Running has just been something. I don't know if I was exposed to strange chemicals or radiation as a child or anything like that, but it's always come fairly natural. I have an uncle who I found out actually when I first started running seriously, or kind of went into my second running life in graduate school. They're just like, oh, yeah, you know that Uncle Doke was the city record holder in the 2 and 400. I'm like, no, I did not know that. He never talked about it. So I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe this doesn't come from nowhere.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpre. If you're active at all, whether you're running or simply out walking for the day, you've probably experienced one of the number one problems that active people have, and that's chafing. Solpre's all-new, all-natural anti-chafe balm solves that problem while feeding your skin the vital nutrients it needs to be healthy. If you'd like to stop chafing once and for all and treat your body right, go to solpre.com to check out the anti-chafe balm today. That's SOLPRI.com. Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Funk. My guest today has her master's in clinical psychology. She spent a decade as a counselor and sports psychology consultant. She's a runner, so at home with me, and we're going to have a lot of good running conversation, I'm sure. She's a registered mentor for the Association of Applied Sports Psychology, which means she can train people entering the field and do some other things, which I'm sure I've forgotten she's going to tell me about. She also recently has been added to the registered list of providers for Team USA, which is really cool. As she said before we got going, overnight success in a decade, one of those things. Welcome to the show, Adrienne Langelier.
Thanks, Jesse. I'm happy to be here. And wow, you made me sound a whole lot cooler than I actually am. So no pressure at all.
Yeah, no pressure. And as we talked about, I knew I was going to stumble over your last name, and it just took me a second. My brain caught back up. So I hope I did that justice.
Don't worry about it.
It's one of those things where, and if people, longtime listeners, are like, this guy really needs to get hooked on phonics or something. But I tried my best because I even know I've got 4 letters in my last name, and sometimes people mess it up, and I'm just like, all right, different people. I think if you've got a difficult last name, you probably live with it and kind of make peace with it. But I still
you have to
try to do justice for you.
Appreciate that, Jesse. Appreciate that.
So before we got going, we didn't get too deep into this, but I have to ask because I'd asked you. Did you run collegiately? And you said, no, I did not. And I went, excuse me? Because I really thought you had. And, you were telling me that you kind of had a non-traditional, I'll call it a career path, since running is like a avocation, I guess.
It's my other job that I do that I either don't get paid or I just make enough to take my friends out to dinner every once in a while. So, but it's still something I spend quite a bit of my time doing.
Right. So can you tell me about how that has progressed over time? Because you did run in high school, but then didn't end up doing the collegiate thing, even though it sounds like you had the option. And then now you are, getting ready for, marathon here very shortly. So clearly still doing it. So walk me through what happened.
Oh man. Okay. So, running has just been something. I don't know if I was exposed to strange chemicals or radiation as a child or anything like that, but it's always come fairly natural. I have an uncle who I found out actually when I first started running seriously, or kind of went into my second running life in graduate school. They're just like, oh yeah, you know that Uncle Doke was the city record holder in the 2 and 400. I'm like, no, I did not know that. He never talked about it. So I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe this doesn't come from nowhere. That's cool. Thanks, Uncle Doke. Appreciate the gift. Anyhow, so in other podcasts, people ask me tell me about your first run. And this is just textbook Adrienne. I think I just came out the box this way to where I love to run and I love helping people out. So the family dog got out when I was like 5 years old. And 5-year-old me took it upon myself to go find him. So I took off on foot without telling anybody. So I'm pretty sure I ran a good mile or so. I did catch the dog. However, my mom was about to file a missing persons report on me, and they were about to send a search. So I came back and I was like, why are y'all worried? I'm like, I got the dog. They're just like, Adrienne, you can't do that. And of course, in my little child brain, that just wasn't computing. But that was my first run. And it, again, it was just something that I naturally did. So I've kind of noticed how like my running path and my career path have kind of mirrored each other. And, I've, because kind of the way I am, I'm really interested in kind of the human experience. And that's kind of how I express myself, is through running. So anyway, I was just grew up in the San Antonio and Austin area. My family kind of bounced around from there. So I played organized sports as much as I can. Ended up sticking more to soccer because hand-eye coordination in me, it just wasn't there. So junior high came around and I had the opportunity to go out for track. And so I was like, oh, okay, I can run a mile, no big deal. And ended up, I still have my district medals from like being a kid in a box in one of my drawers at home. Like they're probably like completely tarnished and you can't tell what they are. But that's kind of how it started. And I'm just like, oh, I actually really like this. But along with that is just kind of the personality style that I have. And I think this is how I can really understand athletes I work with, is I tend to be quite perfectionistic, and I would just vibrate with anxiety on the start line. So it went from being really cool and like finishing a race was obviously a rush, but the lead up to it was just so uncomfortable, and I didn't have the tools to cope with it at the time. So I had some success, but then I was just like, well, what do I do with it? And each race turned into, well, I have to show people that I am who they think I am and stuff like that. So obviously we had some neuroses to work through as a youngster, but I jokingly say that I needed somebody like myself so badly, I just decided to assume that role later in life. So high school rolled around and I decided I didn't want the cross country coach following me around in the hallways, telling me to go out for cross. So I was just like, oh my God, what if I let him down? Like there was just this swirl of basically just negative thoughts, like doubts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And, now I know, I'm just like, oh, okay, well, that's just that mind chatter. That's just doubts, and it's normal. It's part of the athlete experience. But neither one of my parents were competitive athletes. Like I don't really come, but other than my uncle, I don't really come from a family of athletes. So I was just kind of making this up and figuring out as I went. So back to the soccer field I went, because I was fast and aggressive, and I had a lot of energy. So spent my time doing that, and had the opportunity to play like a D2 or a D3 program, but at the time, finances were an issue. So I just went straight to college and just became, I believe, the college athletes I work with call them NARPs. I was a non-athletic regular person for a little bit. And
I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, NARP. There we go, guys. That I laughed quite a bit the first time I heard that. And I was like, well, that's kind of judgmental. But anyway.
A little bit.
Yeah. So I stayed in shape. I worked as a personal trainer. So I was always adjacent to the sport because I would go run on my own. And, junior, senior year, I'm studying, I'm getting my undergraduate in psychology at Texas A&M. And people I worked with, they were into, like, one of my coworkers ran a marathon. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, if this girl can do it, maybe I can do it too. I was just like, oh, okay, well, we'll do a half first. And I was like, wait, we got to overcome our phobia of racing first. So anyway, I started doing a little bit longer runs, which it was just so bush league. Like I had a Timex Ironman watch. I'm pretty sure I just bought my shoes from like a big box store or something like that. And I would run basically from one side of town to the other and back, and I'd just time it. And, I'd run, 90, 100 minutes or something just to get a long run in. And that's when I guess kind of where kind of the base that set me up for my delayed running life kind of started. So graduated. I was a first year grad student, was getting my clinical psychology degree, and I was already kind of the outlier. So I just really leaned into it because I was the sports girl. Is I wanted to mostly specialize in athletes. I was really interested in kind of that world and crossed over kind of into kinesiology and exercise science. So I fully embraced being the weird girl who got up at 6 to run before class, before practicum, and all that kind of stuff. So I had an opportunity to race actually my first week there. I had a professor. He was, I think, an officer in the local running club. I wanted an A in his class. So he's like, there's a 5K this weekend. You should go. And that's exactly how that guy, his name was Dr. Wilson. That's exactly how he spoke. Very matter of fact, you should come. So I did. Showed up, ended up, first overall female by quite a bit. And I'm just like, oh, that really wasn't so bad. Maybe I can do this again, which turned into running a half marathon. And that was kind of one of those experiences where I had no expectations. I'm just like, wow, I'm just doing this thing. It's big, it's unfamiliar. And I start out, it's a 2-loop course. I'm in second place. So I'm like, oh, okay, I guess this is all right. So I'm just kind of running along. And then there's a point where I pass the leader. And my initial thought was like, oh my God, what do I do now? People like this grew up to be sports psychologist kids. So reach for the stars. Anyway, so I was just like, well, I guess I just run. Let's just see if I can stay ahead of her. So first 2 races, I ended up winning by a landslide, which kind of, it's one of those things I knew I had inside me, but caught me off guard at the same time. So things escalated pretty quickly after that. And about a year later, I had a coach. I'm just slicing time off my PRs. So I'm in that patch where I can do no wrong. And that's when I actually, a couple of years after that, I signed my first sponsorship contract, which, I was still kind of like a C-level pro, but, I had a stipend and gear and all that kind of stuff from Brooks. So I basically went from being a NARP, a regular girl, to, a budding elite athlete in about 3 years' time. So again, it's that whole outlier thing is, so, it was a cool experience kind of having the sponsors, but again, it came with, just kind of learning how to do this, learning how to take care of my body and all that kind of stuff, because I was running pretty high volume. My workouts were pretty intense, and, how to feed myself, all that kind of stuff. To where, that lasted a couple years, I started getting stress fractures and stuff like that. And then I kind of went back to, okay, can I even do this? I went from kind of way exceeding the expectations I had for myself to having to like rebuild from the ground up, which was, a challenge and really frustrating. But, at the end of the day, I love the sport. I want to be involved in it any way I can. So I stuck around and I kind of learned, and this is something that I try to teach my athletes too, is you have to meet yourself where you're at. Because what I found that didn't work when I was trying to come back from an injury is comparing my present self to a version of myself from the past. Like, it's like that. Yeah, that was great. But it's, I think that all that's going to do is just keep you stuck if you're trying to move backwards. Like, that's already happened. We can't continue to exist and, project ourselves into the past. Like, progress happens right now.
Mhm.
So that was one of the biggest lessons, that I learned. So within the past, that was a period that lasted, a good 3 or 4 years. I'd make some progress, I'd get hurt again, and have to do all that work on my self-concept that, like, look, I'm not fragile. It's because there's just this idea that there's this perception, is just like, oh, I just have the injury prone label now. Like, I can only do so much, I can only have so much success, which, maybe it was true for a time, but we progress. Like, we don't have to stay in the same place that we are currently. So fast forward, I've been working with a coach, Dave Ames, for the past year or two. So I actually, we started working together during the pandemic. So we had a lot of time to, like, build up a base.
Mhm.
And, kind of really prepare for where we are now. And he's been really good about keeping me in the present. And he was just like, Adrienne, you don't have to go crazy right now. It's like, there's nothing available. We just need to get really strong. So that became the focus from 2020 on. And that's when I was on a run, kind of back when things were looking pretty apocalyptic.
Mhm.
And I started thinking, I was like, man, I'd actually, which I for a while, I swore off the marathon. Love doing the halves and all that kind of stuff. I've had pretty decent success for a girl who works full time and stuff like that. Like, I think I can do this. And, I think I can actually still put down a halfway decent performance. So that planted the seed. And then, here comes Dave. 2 years later, I'm 8 days out from my first marathon in 12 years. Convoluted, winding path. Hopefully some of that made sense, but so we started chasing a Shih Tzu down the streets of San Antonio to being a quote unquote child prodigy, so to speak. Okay, not
Right.
really. Yeah, in junior high, to not much, to a lot, to injured, to now.
Well, it's always, it's always easier to construct the story looking backwards than looking forwards, because we don't know what's going to happen going forwards. I mean, that's part of your job, right? Is trying to, like, mentally construct the story you tell yourself about going forwards.
Mhm.
Like you mentioned about that interior label, I'm just injury prone.
Mhm.
Like, I just get injuries. I mean, that's a story you're telling yourself about
Yeah.
both who you've been and who you're going to be, right?
Right. And our
Um,
brains are wired for story, is we create that. And yes, there's a hard reality out there that we can't change.
mhm.
But I think when it comes to perception of what we're actually capable of, I think we pull too much sometimes from current circumstances, which those circumstances are temporary.
I think that's always difficult, especially when you're injured, because that's, I mean, the pits.
Oh, for sure.
You're in this dark hole and you're like, you don't feel good, and things hurt, and you're like, will I
Mhm.
ever feel good again?
Mhm.
You go, those negative thoughts, and you, like, go down this
Right.
spiral, and um, it can be difficult to get out of, especially if you don't have anybody to bounce ideas off of, a
Mhm.
coach, or
Mhm.
a counselor or consultant like you, because otherwise you're just hearing all the echoes of your mind, instead of having,
Right.
like, some kind of outside interjection to kind of throw that wheel off balance a little bit and go,
Right.
wait a second, like, let's let's try to think about this a little bit more. um i, I did want to back up a little bit. You basically mentioned, having the, like, performance anxiety
Mhm.
when you were younger, and then becoming who you needed. I don't know if this is simply a stereotype of mine. I also, one of my major undergrad majors was psychology.
Okay.
Um, I don't know. So I don't know if it's a stereotype of mine, but it feels like many people, at least in the undergrad section, and I don't know if it is continuing on from there,
Mhm.
or end up specializing in the thing that they feel like they needed when it was, they were kids or growing up or whatever. Like
Right.
they feel, this is conjecture on my part, obviously, but I feel like it's almost a situation of there's such a gap. It affects you so negatively that like
Mhm.
you're looking for the best outlet to fix it, and the
Mhm.
best avenue you can find is simply to become the solution.
Well, and I think like we're all kind of looking for our best self. And I know that sounds very cliche.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we kind of get on that path of like trying to figure out, okay, with the knowledge and experiences that I have, what can this look like? And, getting to a point to where we overcome these obstacles. I know I can only speak for myself, but I was just like, because of the adversity and because of the things that I've dealt with, I'm very well equipped to be able to hear somebody when they're injured,
Mm-hmm.
or if they're struggling with some kind of mental health issue or something like that. It's easier to make that connection. It's a whole lot more natural if it's something that you already know. Kind of the same thing like, people who have gone through ACL tears or something like that, major surgery, a lot of them become physical therapists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're all just I don't remember who it was, but I remember hearing this quote that said, "Don't waste your suffering," uh, which sounds really intense. I mean, it kind of is, but if we really think about it, I guess it's it kind of falls into that. Is like, okay, why would we waste our suffering? Let's use it for something good.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember. Gosh, it's been. I try to look up these. I try to anticipate what episodes I might reference and then look them up beforehand. It has been a minute, so it's going to take me a minute to find this guest. It was like back in episode season 1, I think, of the podcast.
Uh-huh.
Can I even find it? I
don't know. I don't have a camera, so I can't help you.
I know. I can do it. I believe in me. Yeah, Dr. Keith Barr. It's one of my most popular episodes. That was
Mhm.
episode, gosh, what is that? Episode 30. Going back 100 some odd episodes here. I just remember talking to him, and he said, I think it was him. I've talked to a lot of like exercise physiologists.
Mhm.
So if it wasn't him, then whoever said it, I apologize. But he said something about, why do all these people become exercise physiologists? And it's like a lot of them wanted to be professional athletes and just didn't have the physicality to do it. And now they want to know why.
Interesting.
So talking about like not wasting your suffering. I mean, it's a different kind of suffering in that like
Right.
you have an aspiration and you don't achieve
Well, it's
it.
pivoting is what it is.
Right. Right.
Being flexible. It's like, okay, I'm still interested in this. So I'm going to take this passion, take this interest, and funnel it into a place to where, okay, I can actually serve and make an impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Sounds
that's
like I'm arguing. I'm just like, yes, we're not broken people. We just love this stuff.
something like that. I think that's, I don't know. And I've dealt with that. I told you, and any listener knows, I spent nearly a decade trying to become a pro in triathlon.
Mhm.
Didn't quite make it. So I've gone through that like mentality myself of dealing
Mhm.
with the like, you're not as good as the story you told yourself that you
Yeah.
could be or whatever, and dealing with that whole situation. And pivoting, I think, is I don't know, maybe not the easiest, but maybe it's the easiest way to cope. Really, it's just like taking that energy, because you still have like that aspiration doesn't just disappear
Right. Right.
all of a
Right. Right.
sudden.
Right.
Maybe it's injured, but it doesn't just like go away. And
Right.
taking that like energy and motivation and then directing it in another path. Um, I don't know.
I think, especially in the athletic world is, it's sports people tend to stay sports people,
mhm,
to a degree. And something that a conversation I have quite often in my office is, let's say somebody doesn't make it to the level they want to make it, or
mhm,
they have to medically retire, or, some really difficult circumstance like that, is okay. What you being an athlete did not make you who you are. Who
right.
you are gave you the success in your athletic endeavors. So we want to take that, and how can we apply it? Like, you may not get the same rush as crossing a finish line or something like that, but it can still, it can look different, but it can still be really rewarding. And I
Mhm.
know, of course I would have loved to gone loved to have gone faster and stuff like that. I guess still do. But anyway, it's like, I'm like, I'm going to take what made me, the runner that I am, and how can this make me better as a therapist? How can this make me better with the people I'm working with? And, I noticed that, kind of when I talk to peers is just naturally is like, I'm willing to go a little bit farther to help somebody.
Mhm.
And, kind of have developing that patience, developing that resilience that you need, because, I hear anything from, what I have the Olympic trials coming up to, somebody who's really going through something difficult, like a major depressive episode or something along those lines. And I have to hold the line for them.
Mhm. Your
So I draw back from, the experiences that I've had as a lifelong athlete,
mhm.
and being like, okay, this is a really difficult circumstance right now, but what's one thing I can do that's going to help me, that is going to help this person? What can we do right now that is going to move us even just the slightest bit forward?
Yeah, your thought about, you know, being an athlete itself was not who you are, didn't make you who you are. It was who you are made you the athlete you were.
Absolutely.
That idea makes me think about, and I don't know how many times I've mentioned this conversation, because sometimes things just stick in my brain this way. Um, Speaking to Kim Vandenberg, who's a bronze medal swimmer in the Beijing Olympics,
Hmm.
episode 97, for those that want to listen to Kim and stay to the end to listen to her play piano, which is on point with the point I'm about to make.
That's impressive.
She talked about like the swimmers, the young swimmers that she coaches now, and she coaches like, I'll say juniors, but like really young
Hmm.
athletes. Um, but I think she told about one particular young girl who basically wanted to be like Kim, want to go to the Olympics and do all these
Hmm.
things. And Kim mentioned to her, we're counting the story, that like you need something else besides just swimming. Like you need other things that you do. And I
Absolutely.
think that's the beginning of understanding that this one thing is not a defining characteristic of your identity, even though it so easily can
Yeah,
be.
I'm so glad we're going this direction.
Yeah. And so she uses it as like a almost like a preventive measure. So instead of like, say somebody who only swam or only ran or whatever,
Right.
and now they have to medically retire and there is no possibility of coming
Right.
back, and now they've got to come to you and pick up the pieces. It's like
Yeah.
they already have some of that in place where it's like, I already do some of these other things and I can direct my focus and energy
Hmm.
these ways as well, instead of
Hmm.
hanging my hat only on I am a runner, and if I'm not a runner, then who am I? I don't know how many, I can't think of all the conversations because I've had so many of them on this show, of that transition that we all
Hmm.
go through. I mean, Mark Allen, you
Hmm.
and I were talking about that. You listened to the Mark Allen
Hmm.
episode. We talked a little bit about the transition. And he talks about, how to compete nowadays, that he can't compete with the top guys in Ironman. He's too old. But
Hmm.
we all deal with that transition regardless of whether we're 6-time Ironman world champion or Joe Blow running at the back of the pack. Like,
Yeah.
we all deal with transitions, and I think practicing that mentality from an early age hopefully is setting up like young athletes for a
Well,
less painful future,
it's
but
developing a human,
right,
not just an athlete.
right.
And, I think that's one thing that youth sport, we're starting to see some shifts in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I want to see this trend continue, because that's where it all starts
Right.
is, I say I work with humans who just happen to be athletes.
Yeah.
Same thing with these coaches is, okay, this is not the end all be all, this is something you do. You get to do this. And one thing, an analogy I like to think of, people look at me kind of weird when I say it, but I say it anyway. Picture kind of your sense of self like a chair or a table or something like that. It needs to be stable. If we only have one or two legs, okay, that thing's going to fall, it's going to crash. So we have to have, multiple facets of our identity. Like, for me, yes, I run. Yes, I work in the mental health and sports psych world, but family is important to me. My relationships are important to me. When I think about, okay, there may be a day I can't do this anymore, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to, I start thinking like, okay, what do I want my life to look like? And I get excited. And it's not that like, oh, I'm done with running, but it's like, okay, I can move into these other spaces. And of course, maybe I'll miss, being fast, but there's a whole lot more to me than how quick my legs turn over.
Mm-hmm.
Because that definitely doesn't make somebody any better.
Right. Well, I think, and maybe this is simply just a different way to think about it, but for people that find that thing that they love, and for us, maybe that's running.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes because you develop such a deep love for whatever thing it is,
Mm-hmm.
obviously in the context of this podcast, it's often athletics of some sort. Sometimes I feel like you get blinded by like, this is the only thing I could ever love.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's like a high school crush. The first time you fall in love, it's like,
I can see that.
yeah, it's like,
like,
that's the only thing. I can't imagine ever loving anything as much as I love this thing. It's like, we all know as we get older and experience more things, like, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so there's this, life has so many possibilities and so many things that,
yeah, and
there's so many things you don't know that you don't know.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to that, yes, our emotions, we need them, our feelings. It's kind of it's part of the human experience. However, they're not very trustworthy most of the time. So you feel like, oh, this is it. This is all I have. No, I mean, and once we get past kind of some of the really raw stuff, you start seeing that, okay, maybe I can love other things, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, we want our identities to be negotiable.
Right. I also think about, I'm not sure how this is only like tangentially related. You're talking about earlier, winning the races, and I was thinking about one of my races when I came back. I did a video on this. If you're on the YouTube channel, you can look at my July race report from the 4th of July run. But there was a girl that ended up in front of me. I think young, early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, as she was like passing me, I was like cheering her on, and thinking about like the shift in my own mentality towards, I'm not like Zen master egoless, but like that direction where it's like, I'm not as attached to the outcome. Right. It's just like, how did I do that day? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, the girl stuck out to me because there was already plenty of guys that had passed me. But just like, so I think about it because, there's some of that like kind of toxic culture sometimes with men where it's like, oh, you can't let a girl beat you or whatever. It's like, is she better than you?
Right.
So what? Like,
right. You
Um,
gotta appreciate what you're witnessing.
right. And I always joke that I had the privilege to pace Rennie Miranda Carfrey around a lap at Ironman 70.3 Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was basically running with the second place girl, and then Rennie was like behind us. We're all running like 6-minute miles. They're like finishing the race. I'm just starting the run. But anyway, my point being, like, it's interesting to see how it's like you brain shifts over time when you get past those
Mm-hmm.
like emotions of that ego where like, or the story or whatever, I have to be the best, or I can't let anybody beat me.
Right.
And you begin to observe the world from a little bit more detached perspective and realize how you've kind of been in your own way,
Yeah. And
especially
you're
in that case
setting
of
goals that are unfortunately quite fragile.
right.
So I know, like, the marathon I'm about to do is I like to do simple visual cues. Like, I'll usually write a word on my hand.
Yeah.
Like, okay, when I happen to check a split, what else do I want to see besides my GPS?
Right.
I'm not a huge GPS girl anyway, so it's nice to have the distraction. And I think what the based on the last marathon I did, which I thought it was going to be my most successful one, kind of ended up in not disaster. It was I learned a lot. It felt like a disaster at the time. Is anti-fragile. That's kind of gonna be the word. Is it's just like, yes, I want to do well, but more importantly, I want to be present and have the best experience possible, because this is an opportunity. This is not like, no matter what happens, I'm still me. I'm still goofy Adrienne that hopefully people like to be around.
Right.
And, we're still going to have a good time afterwards.
Yeah. Adrienne, as we're getting close on time here, I have to ask you a question, which if you watch the Mark Allen episode, you already know the question. Unfortunately, I always like to spring it on people. But this season's question, which is perfect for you, maybe you can give me some psychological insight, is I want to know, how do you celebrate your wins?
How do I celebrate my wins? Large pizza. No, I'm just kidding. Well, okay, sometimes. How do I celebrate?
It sounds like a genuine answer.
Yeah, I know, but how do I celebrate? Honestly, is a win isn't necessarily first place anymore. It's okay, did I overcome a rough patch? Did I do something previously that I didn't think I could do before? And actually, what I like to do is just kind of sit and reflect on it and just think, like, you know what, I did that. And and just kind of sit in that positive emotion, because it's like, I'm not always going to have that win. So we do need to kind of be in the moment and appreciate it, and kind of have that sense of gratitude. So, I kind of take some time, obviously I'll have the post race meal, or, whatever that is, but I let myself be happy with what I just did. Like, I try not to think too far ahead, because I know a lot of athletes are guilty of that, but it's just stay present and be grateful for what you just did. How's that for esoteric? We went from a large pizza to gratitude.
Hey, esoteric's my jam, so that's always perfectly fine with me. Adrienne, where can people find you, get in touch, check out what you're up to, all that kind of stuff?
Instagram, I have a website. It's my last name. If you have show notes, just look it up in the show notes. It's a mess.
Yeah, if you're on YouTube, it's on the screen. If you're not, it'll be in the show notes. Yeah,
it's Langelier SPC, and actually I just rebranded, so it is also Peak Counseling and SP.com. My Instagram, I'm pretty active there. My practice is called Peak Counseling and Sports Psychology. So at Peak Texas is my practice. And if you want to follow my personal account, you're just going to see a lot of running and dogs.
I mean, that seems like that's probably
Then
just
again,
fine for
that's what
most of the running community.
I think that's the demographic of everybody listening to this. Come to
Right.
think about it,
Right.
is so yeah. So essentially, it's what you see is what you get with my online presence. But I'm trying to spend a little bit more time on the professional Instagram and kind of build that up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Adrienne, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
This is fun. Thanks for having me.